Hi everyone, welcome to GSM Impact Conversations. I'm really thrilled to be here because today we will talk about something really important, the role of theory and the role that theory plays in defining and shaping the future. And I'm joined by a very smart and kind scholar, and his publications and his vision in this theoretical side is quite profound and important. So I want to take this conversation with him just to create this impactful roadmap for us to build on. I am joined by Associate Professor Marvin Hanisch from University of Groningen. Marvin, hello.
Thank you very much, Hakan. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
How are you, Marvin? How is everything?
Very good. Thank you. No, it's a pleasure to be here and have a chat with you on theorizing and envisioning the future and how we can have impactful theories. Looking very much forward to having that engaging conversation.
Wonderful. And really love it. Envision the future through theory. This is great, but also for the audience, I want to say something in public. I'm really grateful to Marvin because of technical issues, we had to reschedule this literally recording 3 times. So he has been really patient. So thank you so much, Marvin, for your kindness and patience. Here we are.
Very, very welcome.
Okay, Marvin, so let's delve into the role of theory. We try to design the future. Tomorrow is uncertain. We are facing so many problems in today's current state. We have climate issues, macro-political tensions, political issues, and social problems, and supply chain management is at the heart of all these intertwined problems. So we try to design a future, but we don't really know how to envision the future. And the theory plays a really important role. So my question to you, based on your track record and theoretical implications, how can we use the theory to really envision the future, what it means, and how can we make this operational?
Yes, no, that's a very good question. So if we think about how we typically theorize, it is like a rear view mirror where we look at the past. So we study what has been, what was, and an assumption inherent in much of our theorizing is that the future can be extrapolated from historical data. We have a certain continuity. And now we're living in very turbulent times where there's a lot of discontinuity in terms of technology, in terms of geopolitical
Mhm.
tensions, in terms of climate crisis. All of that leads to very radical shifts where the future is contingent, where it is discontinuous. And that also questions us as scholars. If we're focusing primarily on the past and how things are, does that mean that this is also how things should be? So our epistemic understanding currently is very much focused on description and explanation, which has its place in science. I don't want to replace it, but as a complement, I think there's room for imagination, for design approaches, for prescriptions. Now, if we look back a little bit into our past as a discipline, what we see is that very often there have been very strong prescriptive theories that told practitioners how to better organize, how to better strategize, how to better market their products. And in the past, let's say 20, 30 years, this has shifted more towards an explanatory and descriptive theorizing approach. So the only thing that I'm trying to stimulate as a conversation is, well, maybe let's connect back to our roots and also think about those prescriptive and future-oriented theorizing approaches. Let me just quickly share one slide. So this is from a paper on prescriptive theorizing that I've published 2024. And the basic idea of this theorizing approach of prescriptive theorizing is that it has two components. The first component is that you think about how the things that you envision should be the end or the goal. For example, many of our phenomena such as ethical AI, board diversity, good governance, sustainability, they have inherent normative properties, meaning that we think about what should good governance look like, and that is what the normative side of prescriptive theorizing really is all about. That you have a goal, an objective that has normative connotations that you then defend through some reasoning approach. Maybe since we're talking about supply chain as well, let me give you a practical reason or example. Now, you could have two different normative stances on how good supply chain management should be. Now, one could focus on efficiency. You design your supply chain around maximum efficiency. That would be one normative direction where you optimize towards efficiency, but you could also optimize it towards resilience, which would be another normative stance. And all that this normative theorizing element does is to defend that choice. Why do you want to focus on efficiency? Why do you want to focus on resilience in your supply chain? Either is defensible, theoretically, and that is what the normative element does. Now, coming to the bottom, the other side of prescriptive theorizing is then also devising means to achieve those goals, meaning how can I actually get to a resilient or efficient supply chain? What are the tools that are available to make that happen? That then becomes the instrumental side. In essence, then, prescriptive theorizing is really this coupling of defending your normative choice and coupling that with the means to achieving that. So these are the two components of prescriptive theorizing, and that can be useful in many contexts, not only supply chain, but across the board. Digital transformation, supply chain management, it can relate to sustainability, etc.
Absolutely. Indeed. Yes, no, thank you, Marvin, for sharing this. Also, you said something really important. Future is contingent, and we don't know what future literally holds. So we need to imagine it. We have to embrace it. But also, this can be quite tricky, especially for the young researchers that are watching us now. Prescriptive theorizing and some other approaches, which we will go deeper in a second. They are also quite exciting and innovative. But at the same time, we need to ensure robustness and rigor, especially when it comes to research design. So based on your experiences, how can we actually operationalize this in the research in terms of research design, assessment, and also approach the quality of research in terms of like the methodological and epistemic rigor and robustness? So based on your experiences, how can we make sure this becomes something robust, concrete, and literally inclusive when it comes to envisioning the future?
That's probably one of the most tricky questions. There are some risks inherent in any form of future-oriented or prescriptive forms of theorizing because they're value-laden, meaning that we make normative assumptions and they can be contested. We may not all agree on the type of norms that underlie certain prescriptions. One of the steps to take then is to defend your choices. And there are, again, multiple ways in which you can do this. So in the paper that I mentioned on prescriptive theorizing, I propose 3 ways in which you can make your goals more defensible. One, in terms of normative theorizing, one approach is consensual reasoning, which assesses the social acceptability of a goal. Who would agree and disagree with a certain goal? And then you engage in a form of discourse analysis. This can be done maybe through a literature review by looking at the latent values that are inherent in the literature. You can ask stakeholders for what is important to them, how they prioritize certain goals. And it's basically the idea of Habermas, who also advocates this discursive approach to norm and value justification. One tool that can help is really thinking through opposites. In a way of polarizing the debate, who would agree, who would strongly disagree, and how can we then find a form of consensus between those poles in the debate. Another approach could be consequential reasoning, where you assess the broader impact of any goal. What are the implications of any normative and value-laden proposition when it is generalized as a goal for the broader society or for all stakeholders? It's more like a Kantian approach to logic, where you engage in projection and also logical inversion. So what happens if you do the opposite? And that could be another way to defend it. And the third is comparative reasoning, where you assess the context dependency of any value or goal. Can the goal be transferred from one context to another? What we often see, for example, if we think of ecosystems, like large interorganization ecosystems, that we transfer theory from biology and ecosystems there to that context. And we can use
Mm-hmm.
that comparative reasoning to engage in analogical thinking and contrastive analysis to say, where are the boundaries of transferring one goal and value from one context to another? These three reasoning approaches are not exhaustive necessarily, and you can find other ways to defend it based on any other ethics or higher morality grounds. That's all fine. But I think what's important is that you have a clear logic that defends your normative premises. So that's the first thing. We have goals that are value-laden potentially that are then defended. When we come to engaging in ways in which we can achieve these goals, the instrumental side, there are also a few steps we can take to ensure rigor. One is, first of all, effectiveness. Does the instrument actually work? Can it achieve the desired goal? Is there any evidence that this works? The second one relates to efficiency. Which instruments has the highest impact given its cost? That's more like an economic argument associated with that. Then we have the viability analysis, which instrument can actually be implemented in practice. We may have fancy ideas, but which of these ideas actually is feasible? And finally, proportionality, which instrument least impairs the opposing interest. Oftentimes, when we go for one direction, it may have negative consequences for certain groups. And what we want to minimize is the negative impact for the impacted stakeholders. These would be the type of assessment criteria you could go through to defend what means you have. And these means can be certain tools, it can be artifacts, it can be designs, it can be managerial recommendations. All of those would then be subject to those evaluation criteria.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marvin. So what I'm hearing and what is actually quite interesting is the fact that actually this also invites us to become more interdisciplinary, also to learn from different disciplines and different contexts to actually create something more holistic. Because as you mentioned, future is unknown, but to theorize the future, we have to embrace all these unknown and paradoxical issues because expectations are different, needs are different. Even when we talk about supply chain management, as an example, suppliers, communities, brands, consumers, we all have different expectations and different needs. So to make this more inclusive and holistic, we need to create transparent and inclusive dialogues. And I think this also theory and this approach is actually quite an interesting bridge to make sure we hear, we listen, and we understand different approaches, and then we create something holistic to embrace the future and to theorize it. But one final question before, because you are smart and I really enjoy this conversation, so I want to have one final question. Theorizing futures is also quite speculative, and we have different approaches: design science, prospective theorizing, prescriptive theorizing, as you mentioned here. And especially for the new young researchers, PhD students, what are the differences? What are the things that they have to really pay attention to when it comes to the distinct boundaries between all of them? How can we actually walk us through the key differences between all these different approaches for theorizing the future?
I think that's a very important question. And the good news is they're not so different in what they are trying to achieve. So whatever you follow, no, that's fine. They're, I would say, very complementary in the type of goal they're propagating or the emphasis they have. Again, let me quickly share some ideas here. So this is a table where I try to compare four different types of theorizing. On the left, we have descriptive or explanatory research approaches. I would say the classic. Now, where you have a certain phenomena and then you explain it, you either develop a topology, you develop a process model, a variance-based model. That is focusing on what is B and why or how does A lead to B. Our traditional deductive approach or inductive approach to building and theory to explain certain phenomena or to predict certain phenomena. In this case, we typically assume that we as researchers are neutral and detached observers. We just observe reality, but we don't really impact it directly. And the logical focus is very much on establishing causality, want to know how certain things are connected, what the categories are. That is our logical focus. And the primary output are then explanations and predictions. That's where we are, I would say, in 80% of our papers. Now, with prospective theorizing, it's similar to prescriptive, but the term is slightly different. So prospective theorizing is very much focused on imagining desirable futures. What ought why be, and how can we get to these desirable futures? We need some kind of rigor in thinking through that, of course, but the role of the researcher then becomes that of a co-creator. We are an active agent also in developing that future. And then, as I said earlier, the focus then also is much more on the normative logic, defending the value premises that underlie these desirable futures. The term itself, desirable futures, has a normative connotation. It is something we want, that is good. That means we have to defend what is actually good, and that is then the focus of the logical argument if we engage in prospective theorizing. And the primary outputs would then be generative models and imaginaries. For example, an imaginary of a better and more sustainable future, of good governance, of ways in which we have a more inclusive organization, for example. All those would be then prospective theorizing approaches. Now, design science is much more focused on the instrumental side of things. How can we build X to achieve Y? We have a certain problem that is defined, and then we develop artifacts or designs to achieve that goal. Design science has its roots in engineering, and that's where it comes from. And as such, we see ourselves as researchers more like creators or architects of a social system. We contribute to it. And through an iterative build, evaluate logic, we then develop artifacts that are better and achieve our goal in the desired way. That would be the focus of design thinking. And the output then is a validated artifact or a design principle. So as you can see, prospective theorizing has a stronger focus on the normative theorizing element. Design science has a stronger focus on the instrumental side of theorizing. And now prescriptive theorizing basically is the coupling of the two. So we have the normative side and the instrumental side. They both come together here, where we ask, what should Y be and how can it be achieved using X? That will be the question. Again, the researcher is an active agent who is intervening in the social system. We're not just observing, but we're shaping it as well. And as a result, we also have a normative and instrumental logic in our theorizing, as I mentioned earlier. And the output then would be a justified social intervention that would help make or help us achieve a desired goal. I hope that
Absolutely.
clarifies it a little bit.
It clarifies it perfectly, and I'm sure especially young researchers or any scholar that is trying to understand this better will really benefit from your paper and your vision. Marvin, thank you so much. So basically, what is really interesting here, the logical structure, it is quite and slightly more holistic. It is not creating binaries. It just embraces both normative and instrumental logics, and it creates something more blended and more non-binary, if you like. So thank you for sharing your insights to help us understand how to theorize future in more creative, innovative, and inclusive and transparent ways. So I'm really conscious of time. So thank you for joining us. And before we go, would you like to say one final reflection to our audience? Do you want to say something before we go? A final inspirational takeaways or any question, reflection from your side?
I believe there's a great opportunity in engaging with the future and theorizing in prospective, design-oriented, or prescriptive ways. So I think that is a fantastic opportunity also to have impact in the field. So I think for me, the main motivation to write this paper was to say, how can we reconnect to reality and practice? How can we actually be an active agent in a social system, not just an observer? And if you feel the same, if you're like, I want to have more impact, I want to shape the future, I want to shape the social system, I think these theorizing approaches are a very strong tool set that you can leverage to make that a reality.
Also, this is really important and it's really interesting to explain. Actually, publications becomes a tool, and the theorizing becomes a tool to shape the future rather than seeing it as an outcome in itself. And I like the fact that you underline and emphasize active agents. So we also invite all the scholars to become more active in the way we defend and build the future, because this is exactly what we need in the world at the moment. Marvin, thank you so much for your time and for being with us.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much, Hakan.
And I invite everyone to become active agents, but also actively approach the Marvin. He's really kind and really also approachable. So please feel free to reach out to him. I will put the paper and other information on the description box below. So please get in touch. And this is just a conversation starter. And hopefully this short episode will lead to many more conversations between all of us. So thank you, everyone. I will see you at the next episode. And Marvin, I will see you very soon. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you very much.